They were there one day, homes, families, laughter echoing through narrow streets, and the next, gone. No warnings, no goodbyes, just the eerie silence of empty land where entire towns once stood. On November 11th, 1930, a Canadian fur trapper named Joe LaBelle trudged through the subarctic wilderness toward the remote Inuit village of Angakuni Lake. He knew the people well, friendly, warm, always welcoming with stories and hot broth. But that night, he found something horrifying. The village was abandoned. Dozens of homes stood eerily quiet. Fires were still smoldering. Food was left on tables, rifles propped by the doors, even dogs found dead and frozen in the snow, untouched, as if no one had time to bury them. LaBelle sprinted to the nearest telegraph office in the Pas, Manitoba, reporting what he described as a total disappearance. When authorities arrived days later, they confirmed the terrifying truth. Not a single person remained. Over 30 men, women, and children had vanished into the cold without leaving so much as a footprint. But the Angakuni case is just the beginning, because strangely, it's not the only time this has happened. In the foothills of the Andes in 1952, U.S. surveyors working for a mining company charted a map referencing a small settlement in the Peruvian region of Ayacucho. Local guides called it Pueblo de las Sombras, the village of shadows. It had about 40 residents, they said, but when surveyors returned just 2 weeks later with supplies, they found only foundations and half-burnt wood where homes had stood. No signs of struggle, no remains, just absence. Locals shrugged. "It happens here," they whispered. "Some places are cursed." Historians and skeptics alike have tried to write these off as misreporting, as errors of record-keeping, as the product of superstition. But the patterns are too consistent and too chilling to ignore. Across continents, across time, there are dozens of documented accounts. Some buried in regional archives, some whispered through generations, of towns that simply stop existing. In many cases, there's no war, no plague, no mass migration. People just vanish, as if something plucks entire communities from the map, without warning or trace. And here's where it gets darker. Satellite imaging from a 2004 geological survey in the Russian Far East captured a cluster of buildings near the Kolyma River. When a scientific expedition tried to reach the location 3 months later, the coordinates led to nothing but untouched forest. Officials claimed the images were distorted or misread. But leaked memos from the team suggested otherwise. They reported disturbed soil, odd magnetic interference, and signs of recent habitation, yet found no people, no ruins, no roads. Who or what removes these towns so precisely, so completely? Are we looking at environmental anomalies, secret military experiments, or something far stranger, something beyond the reach of science? Because here's the terrifying part. In every case, it's not just the people who vanish. It's as if time itself forgets them. Maps are updated, registries are erased, locals grow silent. And unless someone stumbles upon their ghostly remains, the world never even knows they existed. What could possibly be powerful enough to erase entire towns from memory and history itself? And if it's happened before, could it happen again? It began with radio silence and ended in oblivion. In the spring of 1971, the Brazilian military established a shortwave communication post near the dense Amazon basin, tasked with coordinating supply routes to remote outposts and villages. One such village, Pirajui, was a small indigenous community recently marked on updated maps after years of isolation. Over the months, researchers from Sao Paulo had made several trips there, documenting language, cultural rituals, and even forming a tentative trade relationship. There were photographs, film reels, interviews, proof of existence. Then, one morning in June, Pirajui simply stopped responding. No static, no broken signal, just the dead, empty hum of silence. At first, it was assumed that torrential rains had cut off the radio tower or damaged the equipment. A supply helicopter was dispatched with spare parts and emergency rations. What they found, however, turned a logistical concern into a chilling enigma. From above, Pirajui's longhouse rooftops were gone, not collapsed, gone, as if removed from the landscape by invisible hands. Landing crews walked through muddy paths now overgrown, as though no one had stepped foot there for weeks. Chickens wandered freely, untethered. A pot of what once had been boiling manioc sat cold beside a fire pit, untouched by storm or scavenger. Children's toys, carved from wood and bone, lay beside a game of dice mid-play. But not a single person was found. And worse, there were no footprints. The rescue team, trained to track in rain and jungle, reported that the ground showed no signs of exodus. No drag marks, no blood, no trails. It was as though the people of Pirajuí had evaporated into the rainforest. Reports filed by Lieutenant Marcelo de Souza mentioned something bizarre. He claimed the air near the abandoned village felt electrified and their compasses spun erratically. Cameras malfunctioned. Audio recorders picked up faint humming when no one was speaking. The only photo that survived showed the team standing near the longhouse ruins. But behind them was a warped smudge, like a figure in motion, though no one recalled anyone standing there. The Brazilian government officially shut down the investigation 3 days later. The team was reassigned. The files were archived, and Pirajuí quietly vanished from state maps the following year. But the story didn't die. A surviving researcher, Ana Beatriz Mendes, later broke silence in a rare 1986 interview published in an obscure anthropology journal. She claimed that just days before Pirajuí went dark, a local elder had told her of the devourer beneath the roots, a spirit said to punish villages that disturbed certain sacred hills nearby. He had warned her, in quiet tones, that when it wakes, it takes everything. Even the wind forgets us. She dismissed it as folklore, until the radio went quiet. What terrified her most, she said, wasn't the disappearance. It was what happened months later. She returned to the jungle with a private team to find any trace of her friends. But where the village once stood, she found a swampy clearing and nothing else. No signs it had ever been inhabited. Even the GPS coordinates she'd logged no longer matched the terrain. It was as if the land had rewritten itself. Is it possible that entire towns can be swallowed not just physically, but from memory, from reality, as though our world has blind spots we don't fully understand? And if so, who decides what stays remembered and what gets erased? The mountains swallowed them whole and left no scar behind. In 1997, hikers near the Tatra Mountains, straddling the border of Poland and Slovakia, reported seeing distant rooftops from a ridge that, according to every official map, should have been nothing but alpine forest. Several photos taken with old film cameras showed wooden cabins clustered in a small valley below, smoke curling lazily from 1 or 2 chimneys. Curious, they descended to investigate. What they found, however, wasn't a bustling village, but ruins. Old, silent, weather-beaten structures blanketed in moss and rot. But something didn't make sense. The wood showed no signs of long-term decay. The floorboards were firm. Animal feed in the barns was fresh. Butter, of all things, still sat chilled in a wooden box, partially buried in snow. It was as if whoever had lived there had left just moments before, yet no footprints led in or out. The hikers alerted local authorities, and within 48 hours, a team of geologists, historians, and regional police returned with them. But the village was gone. Completely gone. The narrow path they had taken now opened to a small landslide. Trees stood where homes had once been. The mossy cabins vanished. Even the GPS coordinates pointed to undisturbed rock. Accusations flew. Authorities accused the hikers of hoaxing the photos, but after forensic examination, Experts confirmed the images were legitimate and unaltered. The buildings in the photos even matched the architecture of a long-lost mining village rumored to have existed in the 1800s, one that had supposedly collapsed during an avalanche and was never found again. But there had been no avalanche, no disturbance, no geological shifts to explain what the hikers had seen. And then came the letter. An anonymous envelope was sent to one of the hikers 2 weeks later, postmarked from Krakow. Inside was a single page with only 5 words, typed in an old Soviet-era font. You saw what wasn't meant. No signature, no return address. What makes this more disturbing is that this wasn't the only case like it. In the 1980s, Soviet-era records mention an incident involving a reconnaissance plane flying over northern Kazakhstan. A crew reported spotting a small industrial town not listed on any map, complete with smokestacks, railroads, even moving vehicles. But when a second flyover occurred just 72 hours later, the town was gone. Aerial photos showed only barren land, cracked earth, and nothing else. Declassified documents from the USSR's Secret Geographic Division, codenamed Oblivka, referred to these occurrences as temporal misregistrations. Blips in the consistency of space-time where places either reappear momentarily or vanish altogether, only to be forgotten by the fabric of geography itself. And if true, it raises a horrifying question. What if the Earth occasionally edits itself? Not earthquakes, not floods, but a natural or unnatural phenomenon where entire settlements are overwritten, removed, like a bad file deleted from reality's system folder. No smoke, no chaos, just clean erasure. And if some force, natural or not, is capable of such edits, could our own homes, our own cities someday be next? Because what these vanishing villages have in common is terrifying. They don't go with a bang. They simply disappear, as if someone or something deems them no longer necessary. Ships once docked there, people were born, lived, and buried there, but today, no one can prove it ever existed. In the South Pacific, nestled somewhere between Tonga and New Caledonia, sailors for centuries whispered of an island known as Esperanza. Old sea charts from the 1700s marked it clearly, an emerald dot surrounded by treacherous coral reefs and infamous for strange compass malfunctions. British explorer Captain George Collingwood even recorded a brief stop there in 1789, noting native huts, freshwater springs, and an unnatural stillness of wind upon the island's western side. But by the 20th century, something changed. In 1944, a U.S. Navy reconnaissance vessel, the USS Pioneer, attempted to locate Esperanza using both nautical charts and aerial surveillance. The island was gone. Not submerged, not eroded, just absent. Sonar showed no elevation changes beneath the waves. Satellite imaging, decades later, confirmed it. There was no underwater shelf, no reef base, no indication that land had ever existed there. It was as if the ocean had never known it. Yet the paper trail is undeniable. Over a dozen 19th century maps reference Esperanza by name. Multiple maritime logs from whaling ships between 1810 and 1860 describe resupplying there. Some even mentioning interactions with a small native population who never asked questions, only watched. Artifacts from the island, handcrafted wooden tools, rare shells, exist in 2 separate maritime museums in Australia. One even contains a weathered plaque reading, "Gifted from Esperanza, March 1832. But somehow, by the mid-1900s, the island was no longer acknowledged. New World atlases removed it. Nautical charts quietly updated. Even digital mapping services today reject any coordinates you input for Esperanza, defaulting instead to unmapped open sea. Things took a darker turn in 2003, when a French marine archaeology team, led by Professor Lucien Barrault, launched a private expedition to prove the island had once existed. Their vessel, La Spirale, transmitted data regularly for 5 days until it reached the last known coordinates. Then silence. No distress call, no emergency beacon, Just a final, routine message that read, "Weather calm, equipment stable, proceeding with descent." The ship and crew of 11 were never found. An international search ensued, but not a trace. No debris, no oil slick, no beacon signal. French authorities quietly shut down the case 6 months later. But here's the most chilling part. 2 years later, Professor Barreau's niece received a package. Inside was a battered, waterlogged notebook. The cover was cracked, the ink inside smeared, but a few words were still legible. Scrawled in frantic handwriting on the last page, "The island is not gone. It moved, or was moved, and it watches." Geologists argue that islands can sink due to volcanic collapse or erosion. Cartographers claim early maps were riddled with human error. But none of that explains the artifacts, the logs, the photos. A testimony from dozens of seafarers. Something real was there, and now it's not. And if an island can vanish completely from our world, from our records, from even our oceans, how much of what we think is real can be trusted? What else has disappeared without our knowing? There is a file buried deep within the archives of a European satellite imaging agency that contains coordinates to places that no longer exist. In 2011, a data engineer named Stefan Kruger, working at the Global Geospatial Reconnaissance Institute, GGRI, in Berlin, stumbled onto a hidden folder mislabeled under defunct Antarctic surveys. Inside were over 200 entries, latitude and longitude markers matched with timestamps and high-resolution imagery. But here's what chilled Kruger to his core. Nearly all of the images showed towns, villages, or settlements that had no corresponding records anywhere in national databases. Some were pristine, fresh rooftops, vehicles, laundry lines, cattle. Others were deteriorated ruins in deserts or forests, places where civilization should have never existed. Many of them were only visible in one image frame, and then in the next satellite pass, the exact same spot was just untouched terrain. No ruins, no remains. Just dirt, sand, trees, or ice. Kruger obsessed cross-referenced maps, census records, even historical weather logs. Nothing matched. He flagged it for his supervisor, who dismissed it as a glitch. But days later, Kruger's clearance was revoked. His workstation was seized, and he was given a severance package and NDA so thick it legally prohibited him from even discussing which building he had worked in. He broke his silence only once, in an encrypted interview with a dark web collective focused on cartographic anomalies. In his words, "It's not just that towns disappear. It's that someone or something is ensuring we never remember they were there." He spoke of a classified program called NEMRA, short for Non-Existence Mapping and Redaction Algorithm. Its job? To scour satellite footage for any unintended geographic reappearances and wipe them before they entered the public record. Kruger claimed that whenever a forgotten village or island popped up again, however briefly, NEMRA would detect it and delete every trace, sometimes within minutes. But it raises the most terrifying question yet. Where are these places going? Because Kruger wasn't alone. An Australian amateur radio enthusiast named Amelia Bryson had been documenting strange, arbled transmissions in the 144 MHz VHF band, a frequency commonly used for long-distance emergency beacons. Over 3 months, she recorded 17 different signal bursts, all originating from areas supposedly uninhabited or erased. The voices were weak but decipherable. She heard phrases like, "No roads out," "They forgot us," and most disturbingly, "It's still watching from the sky." Experts called it pareidolia, just patterns in static, but audio engineers later confirmed the voice patterns were human and not machine-generated. There's a growing theory among fringe cartographers and data scientists that the Earth might host transient zones, places that exist temporarily before phasing out of sync with the rest of the world. Or perhaps these locations are being consciously removed, not by natural forces, but by some higher intelligence. an intelligence that curates what we're allowed to remember. Which brings us to the most bone-chilling thought of all. What if the world we know, our maps, our history, our collective memory, is only what's been permitted to remain? And every now and then, a crack opens, a missing village reappears for a moment, a forgotten island sends out a desperate signal. But before anyone can reach them, they're erased again, not by chance, but by design. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't nature. It wasn't time. It was deliberate. In 2018, a Russian whistleblower known only as Volk leaked a cache of encrypted files to an anonymous server hosted in Iceland. Among the documents were fragmented reports from a defunct Soviet-era agency called Otdel 6, loosely translated as Department 6. The files detailed a decades-long project tracking geospatial inconsistencies across Siberia, Mongolia, and Eastern Europe, villages that appeared, then vanished. In every case, witnesses were silenced, evidence confiscated, maps altered. But buried in one of the documents was a single phrase, highlighted and circled in red ink. The curator watches what must not be remembered. No rank, no explanation, no context, just that name, the curator. Researchers initially dismissed it as code for an automated system, but a string of chilling testimonies suggested otherwise. In 1995, a former NATO cryptographer named Elise Tremblay vanished 2 days after telling colleagues she had intercepted a mysterious repeating signal. A signal she claimed wasn't random, it was a request from an unknown source asking, "Do you remember the village with red doors?" No one did. Later, audio fragments from Tremblay's last recording were recovered. In it, she whispers, panicked, "There's someone in the transmission, not something. It's choosing, selecting, curating." Other researchers across decades began to connect dots. The missing towns, the blank spots in census records, the reports of magnetic distortion, even tales of recurring dreams, where people walked through empty streets of places they'd never visited, but somehow remembered. Psychologists chalked it up to mass false memory syndrome. But then came the Strasbourg phenomenon. In 2020, over 300 people across France, Germany, and Austria reported the same exact recurring nightmare of being trapped in a city with no name, one with blackened street lamps, static-filled radios, and signs written in no known language. Many woke up with names etched into their skin, none of which matched living persons, but did match gravestones found in villages erased from European maps after World War II. Coincidence? A hoax? Or was something trying to remind us before the curator took notice? One final leak confirmed the darkest suspicion. A private AI research lab in Tokyo, while developing a neural network for geographic reconstruction, stumbled upon patterns in global map data that shouldn't exist. Their algorithm had begun recreating towns that didn't match modern data, but perfectly aligned with eyewitness descriptions from missing settlements, right down to street layouts, architectural styles, even population estimates. One of the developers joked that the AI was pulling ghosts from the grid, but then their entire project was seized by an unnamed international authority. The team was disbanded, servers wiped. Before the shutdown, a final log entry was recovered from the AI's output. Pattern confirmed. Target location exists outside temporal fixed point. Error, subject reappears too frequently. Recommendation, erase. The world isn't forgetting by accident. It's being helped to forget. And the hand behind it, whether machine, agency, or something far more ancient, has a single mandate: to curate memory, to maintain the illusion of consistency, to protect a version of reality that does not include the unwanted. So when places vanish, when whole communities are erased, when you feel that odd pang of déjà vu in a town you swear you've never been to, maybe you have been there. Maybe we all have, but the curator decided we shouldn't remember. And once it decides, not even history will argue.